monitoring and evaluation. And I'll just say a few words of introduction. And we'll be recording this video, this webinar. So thanks so much for showing up today. You know that M&E is not always the most popular topic, but we'll make it very alive, I think, and exciting. That's why Reimagine. Yeah, so maybe you can also share in the chat your name, your organization, which country you're calling in from, and I'll be introducing what the goal of the session is today and how we'll be spending the time together. My name is Tim. I'm working with Ecolis as monitoring and evaluation consultant, and this call is also supported by Laura, who's the network weaver at Ecolis. And today we're going to be talking about, the goal of the session is to learn about existing practices as well as challenges of members of the Community for Future ecosystem related to how they do monitoring and evaluation. And in a way that's not only there to support funders or to, more for reporting that as it is often traditionally done, but to really see how it can actually serve you and how can it serve us as a collective ecosystem to strengthen our impact as well as securing funding. So just for a bit of a check-in, I would love you to share in the Mentimeter link that Laura will be posting here in the chat. What comes up for you when you think about monitoring and evaluation? So I'm just curious to hear, what is your initial association with this term, monitoring and evaluation? And then the second question is, how are you currently involved in monitoring and evaluation activities? And as part of which projects or organizations? So the link, yes, it's in the chat now. Thanks, Laura. So you can just directly click on that link, or if you want to use Menti on another device, you can just go to menti.com and enter the code that's in the chat. Stop sharing my screen, and Laura can share her screen so we can see the results. Is everybody okay with using Menti? Anybody has a question, please let me know. And Laura, are you able to share your screen?
Yes, just a moment. We're waiting for the different results to come in.
It would be lovely if you're willing and able to turn on your videos to see all the beautiful faces. And yeah, if the Mentimeter is not working for you, feel free to just write that in the chat as well.
Yeah, sorry, I can't. My internet's not so strong with the video.
So Laura, I think you can also share as people are still filling in. The results should be live.
Yeah, so these are the results for the first question. So what sticks out the most? It's a kind of word cloud: time consuming and boring. Then there are also things around transparency, feedback, funding, clarity, needed for goals, integration, a box to be ticked, focus, methods matter, also links to strategy or metrics and alignment and learning and accountability. And the involvement in M&E activities, in planning and program design, it's used as a evaluation framework for an action research project about transformative social innovation. Yeah, and it's really needed there for accountability and capacity building. And then also for a social value calculated by MAEX. Yeah, looks more or less the
Yeah,
same.
so I think it's interesting to just observe how our initial thoughts about M&E is usually that it's something like a task that we need to do, right? That's boring, it's not really serving our own needs or interests. It's like something we need to do extra, and we'd rather get on with making the impact happen rather than monitoring and evaluating it. So yes, would be one of my dreams for this session is that you walk away with a sense of, M&E can actually be something really valuable and really serving our own goals, as well as those of funders, and helping us to learn and to evolve and have more impact, to really see it as something we can embed and integrate in how we do our work, and so we can do it more effectively. Okay, so I'll just say a little bit about the presenters we have on board today, and then we'll dive right in into hearing from them. So we have 3 presentations. Share my screen again. So the first one will be from Anna Kovasna from the Global Eco-Village Network. She's not able to join us here, unfortunately, so we pre-recorded that. And she's talking about the Eco-Village Impact Assessment. And then Deborah from the Transition Network will share about how they did evaluation within the transition movement. And Katerina and Andre will be sharing a bit about the evaluation study of the LEADER program, which is a EU funding mechanism for community-led local development. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear about some of those insights. And just to frame what the presentations are going to be about, we asked the speakers to address these 3 main questions. What did you wish, or what do you wish to achieve by implementing monitoring and evaluation in your networks and or projects? And how have you actually designed and implemented an M&E approach in order to fulfill what you wanted to achieve? And what were the challenges you face with performing M&E, and what might be ways to address these challenges? So we'll have 40 minutes now in those presentations. We'll have about 10 to 12 minutes per presentation, including some Q&A. So feel free to post any questions you have in the chat as we're hearing the presentations, and then we'll have a fishbowl discussion afterwards on 2 further questions. So I'm going to share my screen now with the recording of Anna Kovasna's recording.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Kovasna from the Global Eco-Village Network International, and I want to tell you a little bit about our Eco-Village Impact Assessment. Sorry I couldn't be here today, but self-care is important also, and I'm on holiday. So what we wanted to achieve by creating this impact assessment was to have a kind of easy but in-depth way of understanding and improving what eco-villages and other place-based communities do. So that was one of our motivations. Another one was to demonstrate the actions and the impact that communities have in a way that's easy to communicate outside of our own network and outside of who we are. We also wanted to facilitate ways of learning between communities, so to kind of see who's strong in doing what, where do we have gaps, things like this, and to make those results publicly available to people so that we can easily and kind of openly see and browse each other's results. We also wanted to make an impact assessment that was meaningful and useful for a great diversity of communities, as well as for us as a network and a member of the overall kind of regenerative movement. And that was quite a big challenge for us because Gen has members all over the world, right? About 6,000 eco-villages in all kinds of contexts and countries, and some are, you know, they're very, very different from each other. So how can we have some form of, you know, assessment that's fair to an urban community in Los Angeles and the rural community in Ghana, and, you know, a new eco-village with like really high-tech solutions in the Netherlands, something like this. So this was part of our challenge, was to kind of find ways of showing what's the common thread and how are they all making impact, but in different ways. So some of the ways that we took that into consideration when we designed our impact assessment was, first of all, it had to be easy enough for people to complete independently. We knew we wouldn't have like capacity or anything like that to kind of have researchers go out or to do a big study. We wanted to have something that was available, like openly on the website, that people could use and that they could use without any, in a way, like external support. At the same time, it had to be kind of complex enough to yield valid and reliable results. So the questions had to be, on one level, very understandable across cultures and contexts and easily accessible, but also yield data that made the assessment somehow, you know, meaningful also from kind of a deeper like research perspective. So we solved that by creating 2 levels of our assessment. We a bit sloppily just call them level 1 and level 2. The first one, level 1, it's a kind of subjective assessment that any community member can do about the place where they live. And this is not only eco-villages. We created the assessment for any place-based community. So it doesn't have to be an eco-village per se. It can be any type of kind of community-based and place-based initiative. So level 1, it's a series of statements that you simply indicate, I agree, I don't agree, you know, on a scale. And we base these statements on kind of a core pattern in the eco-village network, which is our map of regeneration. So we look at regeneration practices for ecological, social, economic, and cultural sustainability, and we ask our questions within those fields to also make it quite easy to navigate. That level can be filled out by anybody in the community, and it's more valid the more people fill it out. So we kind of score it higher in the overall result the more community members have filled it out. But it's a subjective assessment. It can be quite quick to take. If you go with your gut feeling, it's maybe 20 minutes, something like that. If you want to discuss everything, it's a day, but it can be done quite quickly. Then we have level 2, which is filled in only once by each community. So, and it requires a bit of data gathering, and we aim to make it a bit more objective. So have a bit more like objective measures, some quantifiable data and things like that. And originally we aimed to have really like quantifiable data, so numbers and things like that, but it was so complicated and difficult to make those kinds of questions and indicators meaningful and understandable that we scrapped that for the most part, and we focused on practices instead. So level 2 asks a lot about kind of core practices that eco-villages and other kind of regenerative place-based initiatives use, and that research has shown have impact in different ways in these different dimensions. So there was a really big job behind the scenes kind of figuring out, you know, from both perspectives of research and the eco-village movement, like what are these practices that really yield high impact, you know, and how can we kind of measure them and score them. A plus of this is that it gave us a list of 136 key eco-village practices, like a kind of good practice from across the network. Like I said, we wanted to make it meaningful and useful for a great diversity of communities. So we did a lot of feedbacking when we designed it. We sent it out to our regions. You know, Gen is made up of kind of regions that roughly correspond to the continents. So we have very good access to many different kinds of eco-villages and perspectives. So we had the assessment out for multiple feedback rounds, and also communities and researchers from many different institutions and contexts, like part of designing it. We also asked other community-led initiatives. So we ran it past some transition towns. We ran it past some researchers that were not connected with the project, just to see, like, does this make sense? Like, you know, is this language understandable to you? Can you relate to this? Is this something that you would use? We wanted automatic data gathering and automatic scoring of results. Like I said, we wanted a tool that could just exist on our website and that people can use and that yields results without anybody intervening or coming in to analyze. That limited us in some ways, like we can't have free text answers because we can't analyze them. So there are a few places where you can input free text in the assessment, but it's not part of the scoring. It's just part of information. So you can kind of communicate some things like the fields in which you have education, for an example, or whether you did an ecological footprint study, but that doesn't really count in your score. Then easily digestible and communicable results. First, we decided to use the SDGs, so the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as our second framework. So we have the map of regeneration, and then we have the SDGs, and you can look at the impact assessment from these two angles all the time in the results. So the results are presented through the SDGs or through the map of regeneration. And of course, we did that on purpose to have a lens with which we could look at community practice that is really kind of broadly understandable and adopted, you know, on a kind of global scale. And that also let us map eco-village practice onto the SDGs in quite a thorough way, which only serves us in many, many ways. We also made the results visual and interactive. I'm going to show you in a bit. So we wanted to have, really strong visuals, infographics, things like that. So it's not only kind of text and numbers in the results. We made it downloadable. So once you've done the assessment, you can download the results straight from the website. And you can also screenshot the pictures so that communities can use it for their own reflection, for their own fundraising, for their own communication, things like this. And we created some ways of clustering and comparing. So we can compare, for example, all the eco-villages in Europe with all the eco-villages in Asia, or we can compare two countries with each other or things like this. So that's quite interesting for us, at least, to be able to do. And of course, we still have access to all the data in the back end. So if we want to do deeper analyses, we can, but that's kind of what's there. Openly. And finally, we wanted it to be openly available, but we needed some control over input in order to make it, reliable enough, which means that it's free to use and respond to, but you have to have an account on our website so that we can track, kind of answers and who's responding. And that also means that we log results longitudinally so that you can come back and you can kind of check, what was like the result of this community in 2021 when we launched it, then what's the result in 2023, for example. So that also enabled us to do that, but we had to then make a kind of limit in linking it to our accounts. So that was maybe a bit abstract, but I wanted to show you what the results look like and also what the questionnaire looks like, because at the basis of it, it simply is a questionnaire, right? So I'm going to share my screen real quick, if you bear with me, and we're going to take a look here. So this is what the results look like, and this is from an eco-village in Australia called Narara. I just picked them at random because I know they have very complete and good results. So here's just a little intro, and then you have the SDGs here. And we made it interactive, so you can click on any SDG, and then this little menu folds out underneath. And then you can see first all the level 1 questions. And then you can see, like, what did we consider vital for this eco-village to have impact on SDG 17, which is partnership for the goals. It's to have vision and higher purpose. It's to have some equitable access to land and resources. It's to nurture diversity and cohesion, right? So you can kind of understand our thinking by looking at the results. And then you can also see the level 2 results, so in much greater detail. So, okay, they have a clear vision and higher purpose, but how do they have that? How is that alive? Oh, it's written down, it's read and spoken at meetings, it's part of their education for visitors, and they review it together regularly, for an example. So this is kind of, you see also the difference between the kind of levels a little bit of how we try to ask more concretely about practices in level 2. Not always super easy, but that's how it is. And of course, then you can hover, you can see like 10 is a full score in here, so you can see where they are stronger or where they have gaps, and you can click on all of these and it just changes this kind of drop-down menu. Pretty neat. And if I scroll down, you have the map of Regeneration, which is Jen's own map of kind of eco-village development or regenerative community development. And it works exactly the same. You click on one, you can have the answers for all of level 1 here. And you can also then, of course, see the questions, what they were. And then you have all of level 2, like what are actually the practices that this community is using to nurture diversity, to have fair, effective, accountable institutions, and so on. So that's how it's presented. And this is all open on our website. So I suggest you simply go to here. If you go to ecovillage.org/impact, if my internet connection can handle that, you end up on the landing page. And here you have the composite results of all the communities that have done the assessment so far. The fold-out menus don't work as well because it's a bit too complex to show what everybody is doing, but it's here. And here you can have all of the communities that have done the assessment. And if you just click on one of these, you will end up in their results. So that's a way to kind of browse results on our website. You can also look, but I don't know where I put it. We have all the regional results and things like this. And then I wanted to show you just really quickly what the questionnaire looks like. So this it's really simple, like accordion menu. Follows the map of regeneration. You will recognize this question now. Which of these is true for your community's vision or higher purpose? And here are all the things that people could suggest. And like we saw in Narara, they had chosen 4 of these. And I think 4 here equals like a full score. You don't have to have everything to have a full score. So that's a bit what it looks like. And then you have culture, economy, ecology, and social. You can fill it in and submit and then come back and complete. Like you don't have to, you can save along the way. And I think that's it for kind of the sharing. I hope that was a bit understandable, maybe a bit fast. You're really welcome to come and check it out on the website. It was challenging to create it and construct it in many ways, and I would say it's still not perfect. One of our challenges is still like how to uptake. You know, we have now I think 80 results in our database, but we have 6,000 communities that we're connected to, right? And many more in the movement. And of course, this is a tool that's more powerful for us and our communication, the more people do it, and also our understanding. So we are having now in the coming months, for example, a little drive together with our regions to really help the eco-villages to do this, to do it more collaboratively, to have open webinars where people can come and kind of study and do it together, and to just support the data gathering. Oh, and I forgot, it is also available in lots of different languages. If you go to our website and change your language, it will show up in the language that you have changed it to with an acceptable translation. It's not always perfect, but it's kind of available there. Yeah, and I think beyond that, somehow it is maybe still a challenge, or at least we really thought about it, like how to make it meaningful, like how to have some form of, if you want to call it monitoring and evaluation or impact studies, but that really matter to the people who do it and that matter to us as a movement. Like how can you measure what's important to us also? And a lot of the things are kind of intangible, you know, and it was particularly difficult in, say, the dimension of culture, which is a bit like under measured, I would say, globally. We have quite a lot of like strong ecological measures or things like that. We have economic measures in practice that are strong, but they reflect an economic paradigm that we don't want to subscribe to. So it requires us to be very inventive in how we can measure towards a different ideal. But with culture, that's more intangible. That was a challenge, like how to bring that, but maybe also contribution that we can make in kind of thinking differently about monitoring and evaluation also, like to kind of remember what's important for us as networks and movements, and to dare to include that and to really do it in creative ways.
All right, so that was really rich input from Anna, and maybe everyone just feel free to take a breath as you're digesting all of that input. And maybe just see, is there like one key thing, like a nugget that you're taking from this that you want to make sure you'll remember later or act upon? And then I would like to pass on to Deborah. She shared it before that she's not feeling too great today, so I hope you'll be okay with sharing a little bit, and if you need to drop out earlier, feel free. Welcome, Deborah, from Transition Network.
Thanks, Tim. Nice to see you all. Yes, apologies. I am really not my best today. I got stung by a horsefly at a social change kind of festival yesterday where I was presenting, and I've had an allergic reaction, and I'm on some very strong antihistamines now, and they're making me incredibly tired, and I've got a very sore, puffy hand that's kind of in a sling with ice on it. So I am not my best self at all. I will try and present a bit of information to you, and then I will probably leave and ask you to follow up with me with questions by email if you have any questions or would like to discuss anything that I share. So I'm going to share my screen. Well, before that, I'll introduce myself slightly more. So I've worked for Transition Network for about 3.5 years now and held various roles. But for the last year, I've had a role called Evaluation and Research. And for the last 2 years, I've been involved in a kind of evaluation group in our staff team, looking at how we can explore the impact, potential and relevance of the transition movement in more detail. And this was a challenge that one of our core funders set for us. They really wanted us to explore that before renewing our kind of core funding. So it was a bit of a galvanizing, moment to get us doing that work. So what I'll do today is I'll share a little bit the evaluation we did over the last 1.5 years and some of the issues that we had with that and some of the usefulness. But I think what might be more interesting for some of you is what we're thinking about doing next. Because we learned some lessons from doing this evaluation kind of a long, slow way. But we also gathered so much interesting learning that we want to be able to continue to embed evaluation in the transition movement. But we need to do it in a way that is more kind of sensible with resources, also has a bit more rigor, is more accessible in terms of languages. So we're exploring some tools that can help us do that. And I might even call on you, Tim, to talk, if you're willing, a little bit about the 3D framework and how that's being used in transition, because that's kind of the other half of what we're doing in transition with evaluation and monitoring. But it's my colleague Mike who is holding that, and he's still at the event and we did give an open space session on the monitoring and evaluation in transition yesterday, so it should be in my head. Anyway, I'll share this Canva presentation that we made, and this was to present the results to our core funder. Are you seeing that? Oh no, I haven't quite share yet. There we go. Are you seeing that now?
Still loading up. Yes, there we go. Thanks.
Okay, great. So how do I make it go to the next one? Why isn't it moving? Oh, there's the arrow. Sorry, like I say, my head is very fuzzy. So we did, so it was between 2020 and early 2022. We carried out 2 big bits of evaluation work. As I said, looking at the impact, the potential and the relevance of the transition movement, and hoping to identify some of the approaches and practices that create the conditions for change or directly create kind of impactful change. And the first just over a year of that was kind of a movement evaluation where we had a survey, and about 500 transitioners filled the survey out from, I'm trying to remember how many countries it was, but a large range of different countries. We did manage to put the survey out in several languages. And we had, like a whole section on what are the impacts you think you're having in social, in economic, in ecological kind of, dimensions. And then we also looked at responses to crisis, because this was during COVID and social unrest and wildfires. And so we looked at how groups were responding to crisis or disturbance in their places. That was kind of an open narrative question. We looked at what conditions did they think were supporting them to create change, what the challenges were, what the potential was in the future, and what support needs they needed, and these kinds of questions in the survey. We then created several kind of output reports from that, which I've provided a link to in the document that Laura shared in the chat. So you can see our kind of basic analysis. And we had a researcher working with us, Jo Hamilton, that's done previous research on transition, and probably some of you know her. So that was very helpful. And then in November 2021, our funders presented us with a second challenge. They said, well, this is really kind of an internal evaluation. We'd like you to go further and actually look at the impact, potential and relevance of the movement from the position of your wider stakeholders. So municipalities, organizational partners, funders, local people in communities. And that was a bigger challenge because they're a harder audience to reach. So because we don't just have their email addresses necessarily, or we have to go through several contacts, project, individuals that have worked with them. But we did do, I think we did in the end about 30 interviews with stakeholders that had been involved in transition initiatives. And then we also had about another 20 send us information or testimonials or responses. And we conducted a review of several hundred papers, research papers on transition, and articles about transition. So we did like a huge literature review as well, looking at what people were saying about us from their own kind of research perspective. And again, we've kind of summarized that all, and you can get to the links from this Canva presentation actually. So I'll just show you this presentation, and then you can in your own time look through it in more detail because it has quite a lot in it. So there's just 32 countries and 9 languages, yeah. And around 400 complete responses and about another 150 slightly incomplete. And then we had like a series of webinars. Transition US had also done research recently, and so had the Transition Trainers Circle had done an evaluation on training needs with 80 different trainers. So we had a number of sources that we looked at as well as our own things. And we had case studies submitted from groups about what they felt was impactful. And then we reviewed around 250 academic papers, 25 books, 55 like Medium articles and other articles like that, and about 25 conversations through video interviews and self-recorded videos. So that was all of our data. And the rest of this presentation really kind of goes through some of the impacts, and I feel like it would take too long to go through this. So you have access to this link and you can go through it in your own time if you're interested in the actual content, of what we did. But what I want to talk about more is kind of what we learn in terms of monitoring and evaluation and what we're going to do next. So, but feel free to look through this because it's quite a nice presentation. It's got lots of little short videos kind of embedded in it, and then some meaning making, some sense making about kind of overarching themes and needs in the movement. So if that's of interest to your work, then feel free to dive into this. It's there, so there's lots of videos. I'll just show you 1 or 2 more pages and you get a sense of, yeah, so some groups did like mapping activities to show what the kind of wider ripples of impacts were. And then all these sorts of interviews and things. Okay, I'm going to stop share, but do feel free to have a look at that if you have time. So what we kind of learned from that was the monitoring and evaluation is incredibly helpful, and we've used it to really kind of create our objectives and areas of focus going forward, and it's helped reshape our strategy as an organisation and to identify kind of further support needs. And it's been useful for fundraising, and our hubs and local groups are now saying, can we have access to this Canva to do our own fundraising and our own kind of learning? So that's why we created an actual role called evaluation. Previously, it was kind of held between several team members, but now I'm holding a role of evaluation, and we're looking at how to embed it more. And to help us do that, we're exploring the use of a tool called Sensemaker, which some of you might have come across. It was developed by an academic called Dave Snowden from the University of Bangor in Wales. And it's been used by a lot of different nonprofits and businesses and social action groups and all sorts of people now. Again, I've given you links to their website, and you can look at the case studies and the reports and so on from some of the work that has been done using Sensemaker. So it's a software. You basically have to go on a training course to learn how to use it because it's quite complex. And the idea is that it helps you look for patterns in complex kind of systems. So it's really good for looking at like grassroots networks and distributed systems. It's a story-based approach. So they're trying to kind of, I guess, shake up how evaluation is done. So instead of there being kind of quite a lot of researcher bias potentially in sort of surveys and or drawing data from qualitative, drawing meaning from qualitative data, this story-based approach does collect stories in the person's own language as well. So that's great. They don't have to try and speak a second or third language. They can actually record using an app, like voice record a story in their own language or type a story in their own language. And it will create a transcript for you at the back end, which you can then translate using a translation service. And I think you can get an add-on to have them translate it for you, but it's more expensive. And then the next interesting, so that's very interesting to us because it allows multiple languages and stories collected in people's own language, which I think gives richer information. And then second thing it does, which is interesting, is what happens after you've entered your story as a participant is you self-signify the meaning in that story. So you draw the meaning out of it instead of the researcher drawing a meaning out of it. So what you learn to do as an organization doing the training is design all these little triangles and sliding scales with different concepts on them. And then the person filling it out like moves a dot in the triangle to kind of give quite a nuanced answer. So an example of that would be, this is the example they gave us. If you were doing research on domestic abuse, the story you were asked to share might be something like, how has domestic abuse shown up in your life or the life of someone close to you? So very open, broad question. And then you'd have some multiple choice kind of things like demographics and so on to help you filter the data. But then you signify it by saying, so taking concepts, abstract concepts from research, like the concept of justice, you might, next question might say, how did justice show up in your story? Was it kind of, what in the outcome of your story, were you looking for punishment, reconciliation, or deterrence? And you move like a little cursor around to kind of indicate how your story relates with that more abstract concept. And what you get at the back end, which is really interesting, is these complex spreads of lots and lots of dots around these kind of concepts that relate to your area of work. So if you're looking at, climate resilience or solidarity or regeneration, you can go and find concepts from research that's been done about those things and then use those in the dyads and triads. So one of the things we're interested in is, what are people's narratives about potential futures? Are they expecting collapse? Are they expecting kind of solar punk green tech? Are they expecting, and we can put those on a triangle, or you can even put images in and have people move things around images or select different images that are meaningful to them. So there's lots of different ways that they start to signify their story and their experience, that you provide like a range of different things that they can interact with. And then the software kind of crunches it into these either patterns or summaries of the information. And the other thing it allows you to do, so it's very helpful. One of the things we struggled with was to do kind of quantitative analysis. Like we didn't really look at how one factor affected another factor. So if you're in a local group or a hub, or if you're in the global south or the global north, or if you've been involved for 1 year or 10 years. You know, we didn't do kind of cross analysis of different factors and how that affected people's responses about impact or engagement or potential, because it would have required a lot of statistical knowledge, and we didn't have that. But in Sensemaker, you can do that automatically. You can set a filter for geographical region, or a filter for gender, or a filter for level or length of involvement, and it will take out all the patterns and show you just those ones. And then you can compare them between regions or compare them between other factors. And that's really useful for us because we want to look at things like narratives and practices of change that are different across cultural contexts, so that we know. So we have a sense that Latin America is very strong on inner transition, and that Northern Europe is pretty strong on working with municipalities, for example. But we want to be able to look at those sorts of patterns so that we can then help different parts of the movement talk to each other and share the practices that they're having success with. And that will allow us to look at that kind of thing. And then as a support organization, create the ways for them to share with each other what's working for them. So that's what we're hoping to do. It's not a cheap piece of software, but they give you a lot of support. And I think funders really like it because it's both rigorous and gives you complex, nuanced data. Their values are very aligned with ours in transition, and potentially with lots of you as well. And I think in the future, what we'll do is we'll write it into funding applications as part of our kind of bid for funds to say, look, we really want to do fantastic monitoring and evaluation. Here's a tool that will help us to do that, and just include that in funding bids so that we can actually continue to afford to use it. So we're going to do a pilot later this year and into next year, and we'd be really happy if you want to join in with that or look at the data from the back end. It should be open source, the data as well, so you can see how we get on with it. And if you want me to come and talk to any of you more about it, I'd be really happy to. That's probably enough from me. Oh, Tim, did you want to say something about how we're using a 3D framework in the England and Wales project as well? Because that's kind of the other half of our evaluation work that we're doing in transition right now.
I can very briefly, I'm aware of time that we're already running a little bit over. Yeah, maybe just to briefly say that in the Transition Together project, which is the UK, England, Wales, Scotland sort of branch of Transition Network, we're using Scale 3D, which is a model I used in I developed in my PhD, and I'll share the link to a introduction slide chat, which is basically about looking at how does transition contribute to widespread fundamental change that is lasting over time. So those are like the 3 dimensions of width, widespread change, depth in terms of fundamental cultural and systemic change, and length, creating change that is lasting and persistent over time. Yeah, I think I don't have time to say much more on it, but please feel free to have a look on the link I just shared and address any questions to me.
Maybe what I'll say, Tim, about 3D framework is that I love that it has the roles of like different roles for creating change, and then how do you build transformative capacity in your groups and projects, and then also transformative impacts. So it really helps you think through that kind of planning of what capacities are we building, what impacts are we hoping for, what are the roles we need to manage that, and to actually plan the kind of, and then are we looking, yeah, and then as Tim said, looking at the width of your impacts, the depth of your impacts, and the length. So it has like it's a very nice framework for designing work streams and then also being able to evaluate them. So thank you, Tim, for helping to develop that framework. And we may well be using it across transition. We just haven't quite, I guess we're piloting it in the England and Wales project, but we may be using it more widely.
That's great to hear. I'd love to co-create that further with you. Thank you so much, Deborah, despite your not feeling well, presenting this very energetic and clear presentation. So maybe let's just take one more breath together. And again, maybe just tune in and see, is there something that stuck out from what Deborah shared that felt particularly alive or meaningful for you? Feel free to just capture that in your own awareness, bookmark it for yourself, or maybe if you like, share that in the chat. And then I would like to pass the baton on to our last presenters, Katerina and Andre. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. I think, Andre, can you share the presentation, please?
I will do it.
And maybe in the meantime, while Andre is sharing the screen, our presentation is on the recent evaluation of LEADER. It was an EU-wide evaluation. So it's a completely, I think, sort of different scale and angle in some senses. This was the first EU evaluation after sort of 10 years. And I think what we've tried to do in this presentation in particular, we didn't focus on the evaluation as such, so the results of the evaluation or the recommendations, but we focus on the approach to the evaluation, the methods used, and perhaps also the challenges that we face, and how this can be actually relevant to the other evaluations and maybe to the level of the local action groups is sort of things that are common throughout Europe, and how the LACs themselves maybe can then influence and impact and the overall evaluation, whether it is on the level of the local action group, whether on the national level, or whether on the sort of EU level, and what maybe could be learned from that. So I think if we can start, I'll start, and then we'll switch places. So maybe if we can start. So I'm not going into any details here. I just want to say that this was a very classic traditional EU style evaluation with very rigidly prescribed timeline and very rigidly prescribed sort of really parts of the evaluation, and it's a classic approach. But what we try to do is what you actually sort of then how you make use of that rigid structure, and what you can sort of do with that in a very very limited period of times. And I think if we go to the next slide, we can see that the methods are really important here. So we were free in the consortium to actually design the methods. The consortium consisted of ADA in Belgium, CCRI, University of Gloucestershire, which led the evaluation, and then also our partners, ORI in Austria, and then CREA in Italy. And then we also had our collaborators in various different case studies countries. What I would like to say is that the evaluation questions obviously have been delivered to us, but how you fulfill and how you actually deal with the evaluation questions, that is up to the evaluation team. So what's been done here, it was a very complex exercise, if you like. We obviously went through the literature, not only the academic literature, but also the grade literature and the documents. We've decided to take a case study approach, and we had a very sort of in-depth discussion on how to create sort of meaningful criteria, how to select the case studies, so they will be representative of what's going on in the LEADER delivery across all the 28 at that time member states, because UK was still part of this evaluation. And then based on that, we've selected 14 rural development programs in 10 member states with 36 local action group. Again, the local action group, the criteria for selection of those local action groups, we very sort of really carefully designed to be able to capture the huge variety of local action group and the approaches within the EU. And apart from that, we also designed sort of 2 EU-wide surveys. One was for the managing authority, and the other one was for local action group. More than actually 800 action groups responded to these survey, but only slightly over 500 responses were complete. But still, it was quite a significant number as far as EU-wide evaluation. And then we went into, obviously, the in-depth data analysis, and then we also held evaluation, sort of validation workshops at the level of the case studies and also at the EU level. So I think we can move on. And this is just really showing the sort of member states and the local action groups that were selected as a part of this evaluation, and also the approach that we've taken as far as who to talk to, who to interview as a part of this case study. I think we can move on.
Okay. It's my turn. So hello, everybody. I would like to say that for well-designed evaluation, it was crucial for me because I was responsible for collecting of data on local level in the Czech Republic. So it's important to give a lot of space to the selection of the partners who would be involved. We selected local action group according to different characteristics of this local action group. It was predefined, and we used such characteristic as experiences of local action group, the size of amount support, and also the type of territory, type of area. Similarly, I think that it's very important to think about the selection of the communication partners for evaluation process, because the portfolio of evaluation partners or partners who were involved was quite broad, because the representatives from Ministry of Agriculture in Czech Republic, as a managing authority, there was also paying authority, national rural network members, national network of local action group, and also expert. And also we had to include it free local action group in the Czech Republic as an example for evaluation, as a case studies, in which we spoke with managers, member of a program committee, and also with beneficiaries. So Katarina, it's your part.
You can skip this for the moment. We can come back to this one. If you can just, yeah. So I think what is important to say here, just very briefly, without going, we don't have time to go into too much details, is also to take into consideration the complexity of the leader approach, and the various different output and outcomes that it actually produces. And the complexity was even more complicated by the fact that in this evaluation, we could only evaluate the support from measure 19 of the rural development programs, and we couldn't evaluate the overall impact of leader if the LACs were using multi-funded approach. This was a huge limit in the study, but I don't think it's something uncommon in EU-wide evaluation, because these evaluations are very sectoral evaluations. But I think it is very important to flag out that there are significant limitations on what you can and can't do within these evaluations. And LEADER is really, thanks to its principles, a very complex program, producing really many outcomes and outputs within a very complex environment. So this is just demonstrating, this slide is just demonstrating the various different connections and the complexity of the program within the evaluation. And as far as the analysis itself, I mean, we already mentioned the approach and how we designed methodologically the approach. So obviously, then there is quite a long journey from the collection of the data to the sort of analysis and to validating and triangulating your results. So it's again just shows that within a complex evaluation, it is not a straightforward path, and you have to take into consideration various different sources and also be able to analyze the various different data that are available to you. And I think we can.
So it's my part, because we wanted to ask for some question, and it's quite complicated for us because the nature of our evaluation. I tried to think about the third question: what challenges have you faced, and how could this can be avoided in the first place? I would like to say that from my point of view, during data collection, I perceive that the willingness of actors to engage in this process of evaluation is crucial, and was crucial for successful evaluation, especially in case of a member of local action group, and also especially in the case of beneficiaries. The most challenging part was then to gain the insight of the beneficiaries, because to whom it was necessary to find a way how you can involve them, how you can build the trust and willingness to participate in this type of interviews, because it was a huge challenge. And also I would like to say that, let's say, for public sector, for their representatives, the willingness of this sector is somehow natural and necessary. But on the part of local action group and these local beneficiaries, is necessary to build this willingness to participate, and to build the trust to do successful evaluation. The more complex limits and challenges Katarina will present just now.
I would also like you to wrap up, if possible.
Yes.
The next minute.
Well, okay. So it's only 2 more slides. So we will definitely wrap up. As far as the evaluation methods and the overall review of strengths and weaknesses, I think what is important to say, this entire evaluation was done online. There were no face-to-face interviews, and it was very, very challenging because this was EU level evaluation. What was really a big strength was the very rich literature that is obviously available on LEADER, because LEADER has been always something that attracted attention of academics, and it's a very popular topic to deal with. We also were able to gather quite a lot of secondary data, but what was very valuable were the online surveys and the case studies, which provided completely invaluable amount of data and information, without which we wouldn't be able to actually go ahead. On the downside, we also have to flag out that there was quite a low response from some of the member states. And one of the big stumbling blocks was perhaps the language, because the surveys were provided only in 4 main sort of EU languages. Also, the managing authorities' willingness to fill in the surveys. We had to put in quite a lot of work into.
Sorry, Katerina, I think I would invite you to come to a close now, so we still have a bit more time for the discussion.
Yes, we can do that. Yes. So overall, I think what is important is that at the moment, the indicators are really not suitable to capture impacts of leader. I think there needs to be some kind of a change in that. And also there needs to be a simplification, how you deal with sort of recording projects and activities. And what is also important is to really look at the current context indicators and the way how a leader is monitored and evaluated, whether on the local, national or regional level, because it was very clear that this doesn't really capture the whole impacts of leader.
Great, thank you so much for that very rich presentation as well. Again, maybe a breath or two will help us to digest all that input. And yeah, so I would like to invite now for the last 25 minutes. I thought we would have a bit more time, but the presentations were so rich. We gave a bit more time for that. To just have a bit of an open discussion. And we thought we'll try and do that in a fishbowl format, which basically works in the following way, that you can turn your video, everybody can turn their video off. Then if you would like to be part of the fishbowl, basically the 3 people can be in the bowl at the same time. You can turn on your video and then you'll be appearing on everyone else's screen. And to make that even easier, you can select one of the windows in your Zoom window where it says, there's the 3 little buttons on top, and then select hide non-video participants. That way you'll only see the people who are having their video on. And yeah, so I would like to invite now for fishbowl discussion on these 2 questions. How do we need to think differently about M&E to really make it serve our impact ambitions, rather than just external interests or funders? And secondly, how might we align monitoring and evaluation approaches from Transition Network, from Eco-Village Movement, from Leader or others, so we can have more of an integrated approach to generating evidence and reporting towards funders, policymakers. So maybe let's start with focusing on the first one. How do we need to think differently about M&E? And yeah, I would like anybody who would like to join the fishbowl to get us started to turn their video on. And maybe some of the speakers can join for the fishbowl, or anybody else who would like to share about this. Maybe just to say about the Communities for Future ecosystem, the ambition of EcoLease is to weave together community-led movements like the transition movement, eco-village movement, permaculture movement, and other kind of communities that are trying to regenerate ecosystems and communities. into a more cohesive, collaborative network. And yeah. So is there anybody who would like to come on and share a bit about how to think differently about M&E? And as you're finding your courage to join us on stage and turn your video on, maybe I can just say a few words. Yeah, that
I'm having trouble with
M&E
my internet, so I won't turn on my video, but I wouldn't mind
okay,
joining. Sorry if that causes difficulty.
please go ahead.
Cool. Are we waiting
If
for
you want,
somebody
you
else?
can get
or-
us started.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, for
Maybe
for
say
me,
who's you. Maybe you
for
can
me,
say your
M&E
name and
yes.
where you're from.
Yeah, Mario Yanes from Portugal. Working on a couple committees of practice, Erasmus Plus funded projects that are both well underway. And working with the Knowledge Commons of EcoLease as well for Communities for Future. So there's a tie in there. Yeah, I think the more that we consider, instead of considering M&E as something that we do as an event that happens maybe at the beginning and definitely at the end of a project, we consider how to even do it at the micro scale, like different interventions and even the process of unfolding the project, etc. And that then it becomes a very much a co-learning activity all throughout, and one that we can capture, learning on an ongoing basis in these projects that we work on, potentially giving them the ability to the impacts of them to last longer than just when it ends. So that's what I would say about the first question.
Yeah, thanks so much. I would invite anybody else who would like to come in on that question to join us. You can just say that, yeah, evaluation has definitely been very, I would say even misguided, or sort of maybe there's value in the more traditional approach to just focusing on generating evidence and sort of doing it at the end of a project to see, can we judge a project as something that is worthwhile doing again or continue funding, and to really rethink that in terms of embedding it from the get-go, like from the beginning, thinking about what is it that we actually want to achieve in the medium and long term. So it's really embedded in the strategy development process, and to use M&E as a way of making more concrete or more specific how do we know that we're successful, right? A lot of times we just do things that we have assumptions that they will be having impact.
Yeah, I think that's really critical to just be able to shift the way we see them. And like we're always evaluating what we do implicitly, or just did what I say have some impact, or or is what we're doing, but we don't always actually go through with being conscious about how we do it, or like somehow explicitly track it or document what we do. So I think it's more so choosing the moments that are the most critical moments, or finding a way that it's just a very easy pattern to apply across the board when you're doing things.
Right. Hello, Ad or Ronald.
Hi, yeah, my name is Ad Flems. I'm initiator of Boekel Ecovillage, and we were the high-tech ecovillage that how was she called? Anna Kavasna mentioned in her movie. We in the Netherlands, we have a platform for citizen-led initiatives that's called MAEX. And in it, there are 2,000 projects already on that platform. And in it, you can fill in a survey, and at the end, you get your social value according to the Dutch organization. There's a statistical organization that does all the calculations for the government. So it's a really an important, they also do the reports each year for the government, how the Netherlands is doing on all the SDGs. So they know what they're talking about, and they're very highly valued by the government and by funding organizations. So each of these citizen-led initiatives can fill in the survey and get the social value, which is the value of your organization calculated by what if you weren't there, how much would that cost the government or the society? So we filled in each year, and we started with 60,000, then it became 130,000, then 370,000. So by filling it in each year, you can see the value adding up. And the organization of the platform has contacts with a number of funding organizations, charity funds. So sometimes the charity fund says we're going to donate 5,000 euros to all projects that have a high impact on that SDG and that SDG. And then they can just give them a list of all these organizations, and then they can easily find which ones they want to fund. The nice thing is, of course, that someone else is doing the funding for you. So that saves a lot of time. But also each year you can have the fundraising. But also each year you can have a year report. So you can show that, connect that in your yearly report that goes to the accountant or goes to funding parties. So that helps a lot, that there's a good partner, a solid partner that is being recognized by the government. And SDG reporting is also something that everybody knows. So that's also very valuable. I wanted to tell that because that's the advantage of monitoring, is also that it's easier for getting funding or proving that the funding was a success.
Or giving funding, so it's a matchmaking platform.
Yeah, or giving funding because it's a matchmaking platform.
And has it also helped you to kind of be more reflective, or to see what are your strengths or your weaknesses, and thereby develop more as an initiative?
Well, not yet, but we are now trying to help other eco-villages in the Netherlands to fill in the document. And what we advise them to do is to fill in what they, how they live now, as being how they lived last year, and fill in for next year how their project is going to be like when it's finished. So then they can go to the municipality and say, if we come into your municipality, this will be our social value, and this is what we are going to change. So I think it's not really effective for us right now, but I think it will be in the future, and also for the other eco-villages. And the nice thing is also that if an eco-village scores less on, for instance, education, they can find another eco-village that scores higher on education and ask them, how did you do that? What are you doing? Also, the survey is fact-based. It's not subjective like the eco-village impact assessment, but it's based on numbers.
Great. Yeah, Amelie coming in.
Yeah, hey. Thanks for sharing that, Ed. That sounds really interesting, and I would be glad to follow up on it. Maybe you can also share a link with us, because I think it's amazing that you are working on the SDGs in such a strategic manner and are getting supported by governments or other funders to implement what we have agreed upon at the international level to be valuable goals to strive for as a society. And I think that's what's so inspiring for me about this monitoring and impact evaluation, because in the end it makes everything much more tangible. And I think it's also a way to counteract some of the narratives that are currently misleading us maybe into directions that are not really helping to serve the well-being of people, but are more like profit oriented, economic growth oriented. Those are the indicators that a lot of the current economic political system is referring to, and the GDP is like the highest value that needs to be always kind of grown. And with these frameworks of sustainable development goals, or also the map of regeneration, or just kind of alternative value systems, we can just show that what we are doing is actually very meaningful and valuable for society, but also show where the gaps are and see what is still missing. So I really just want to acknowledge this as an important tool in our strategic development and giving legitimacy to what we're actually doing. So that's what I would like to share.
Thank you. I'll try and find it in the background, and I'll put it a link in the chat.
Thanks. And I would like to maybe just say some things on behalf of Anna that I asked her during the recording. She mentioned that they used the SDGs, but they also felt that it can be quite restrictive, and that it was even below their ambitions and not really reflective of who they are. So she also really encouraged us to take the initiative in our own hands and not just following somebody else's framework, but to really see like what is it that's really at the core of our initiatives, and what is it that we value, and how can we even go beyond some of those existing frameworks and be cautious in how they might reduce us or kind of cage us into a certain ways of thinking. And she also mentioned, as you said, Amelie, she was also aware of this economic measurement paradigm that's often based on very exploitative processes, right? So, but sorry, I think Mari, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, no, I could say a little bit more about that. So I worked on with that as part of a project with Anna on the survey and generating the practices. And then we got to the point that the SDGs weren't enough, the bar wasn't high enough. Many eco-villages have already surpassed a lot of the targets at their scale. And so what I did is I rewrote them as regenerative development aims. And so we haven't got to the point. I think Anna's already been, Eco-Village Network has been adopting them and using them internally, and I'm not sure to a point. I mean, we haven't published them yet or anything like this, but the idea is, and this could go towards answering the second question you proposed, which is creating an instrument that we can use to develop, some sort of pathways or our own evaluation systems, or sort of set our own targets for what we want to, what we want our world to be like, versus, like you were saying, responding to something that's very questionable the way it was developed, and not inclusive of everything, and definitely not forward thinking or whole enough, like really addressing whole people and whole communities and this kind of thing. So so I don't have a link exactly yet. It's sort of still a bit of a working document, but there's probably some things that we can put out there. The good news is that it's going to be in the Communities for Future wiki, and we're going to set up hopefully an automated way or a guided way to go through them as a community. The last thing we want to do is make it a set of commandments And it very much needs to be an instrument that can be used dynamically, instead of saying like, this is what you have to do. These are the things you need to think of, and both, you know, and walks communities through developing their own aims versus here, these are the goals. You know, and so that's a bit of where we're at.
Can I ask you a question? Because I also am aware of maybe some issues connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. For me, the issues are more in the fact that they're not really being implemented, and not so much in the framing around them, because I mean, end poverty, end world hunger, all of this are really like good aspirations, and maybe they're still not ambitious enough. Like we need to go beyond just ending poverty, but I would just like to get a bit of more of a sense for what your values are and where you disagree with.
That's a really good question. Yeah, what we came up with some very concrete practices that were kind of proxies for, you know, for the kinds of things that needed to be done and we also reworded it. Instead of ending poverty, it's creating abundance, you know, in communities across the bioregion or whatever, like that kind of thing. So that one, it's not in the negative. Two, that it's not impossible to do. And then that could be work at multiple scales, because I can do that in my neighborhood. I can do that in my eco-village. I can, you know, saying ending poverty is an impossible thing at like the earth scale necessarily. So creating the list of practices, and then those practices were what composed the survey, for instance. You know, are you doing, which ones of these things are you doing, or how do you integrate these things, and so forth. So it became very concrete, but at the same time, it was a composite of things that represented the bringing about abundance, or any number of things.
Thanks a lot.
Welcome.
Yeah, since there's also a lot of activity in the chat, I will also leave the space, and maybe someone else would like to join. Thank you.
Thank you. So we only have 6 minutes left. Is there anybody who would still like to respond to the second question, and how we might align M&E approaches across the Communities for Future ecosystem? And I just wanted to read out the comment that Berenice from France, from RIPES, posted in the chat. The appropriation of the evaluation by the communities is a real issue of democracy, and it's perhaps eminently political. Congratulations to the Gen Network, which seems to have both a method that links the qualitative approach to the notion of measuring. Thanks for the comments. Yeah, if nobody else would like to come in, maybe I'll just share a few more comments from Anna that she shared previously. Basically, the framework and the model that they created is based on practices, right? And a lot of those are relevant not only to eco-villages, but also to transition initiatives. And they have a WordPress template with an open coding, so she said that's available for others to also adopt and further build on to their contexts. She also mentioned that, yeah, building this kind of collective M&E approach across movements could really also support the learning across these different networks and initiatives, and helping us to communicate our impact as community-led initiatives in a clearer way across movements. And that could really boost our advocacy efforts and have the voice of communities be taken more seriously at a EU level or other governmental levels. And she was also imagining how it can be plugged into how municipalities measure their own progress, and basically showing them how, if they have an eco-village, how that helps them to reach their climate goals, their social cohesion goals. And maybe what we heard from Ad about the MAEX, maybe that could be integrated in that. She also mentioned how the data that was generated through their framework can also allow for deeper research, right? For using some of the data from those assessments, and then people can look into what are the factors for effective eco-villages that are scoring in the top 10 and compared to those who are maybe scoring a bit lower. Yeah, are there any other thoughts on how we could collectively build a more cohesive M&E approach across movements?
I definitely don't want to hog up space, but I have an idea that I can also share about what we're doing with these two projects that I mentioned I'm working on. These two communities of practice, but the idea is we're going to invest quite a bit of effort to make the knowledge commons that's part of Communities for Future platform way more accessible, easy to use, dynamic, so that we can have that platform for us to co-learn on, to do these kinds of things, to share the practices, to share our principal frameworks, to share the processes that we're using to develop things. And so I'm inviting anyone that's interested into that conversation, and to just keeping in touch and keeping an eye out, and at the right moment, bringing your community of practice to the table. And we haven't quite developed everything yet, but in the next couple of months we should have a lot more solid things to show for. So anyway, that open invitation for people to get involved.
Great, thanks so much. And yeah, that leads nicely into the closing. So we have one more Mentimeter for you to fill out and think about which questions would you like to continue exploring with others, either through email exchange, or we might organize another session like this focused on M&E. So which questions would you like to continue exploring with others? And the second question is, what are your main takeaways from the presentation and the discussion today? I just post the link to the Mentimeter here. And Laura, if you would like to share the screen again. The results. Or Sarah, you want to say something about the Communities for Future sessions? Yeah, feel free to turn everybody to turn your video on again, and we can say goodbye to each other. Yeah, again, if the Mentimeter is not working for you, feel free to answer the 2 questions in the chat, and questions you'd like to continue exploring, and your main takeaways from today.
And Tim, I shared the link to the results. Maybe you can share your screen because my Zoom window is a bit frozen.
Okay, sure.
Put it in the Zoom chat for you.
It's coming up. It doesn't let me see the questions. Logged in. Just seeing a couple of takeaways here. Which goals can CLI set themselves? Or let's question, how do you measure and evaluate emergent outcomes? And maybe just to respond to that, outcome harvesting is something that maybe is also a really relevant methodology. That's about maybe telling stories of outcomes and what's valuable, and collecting those stories, analyzing them. It also looks at emergent outcomes, not just pre-planned outcomes. Yeah, again, feel free to share any more takeaways or questions. And we'll leave it at that for today. Thank you so much for showing up to this Communities for Future session. We'll have more coming up in, I guess, September, October. I don't think there's any planned for now, are there?
Yes, we'll take a break for August, but come back in September with the next session. related to youth and kind of bridging different from climate activists to community builders, and we'll invite some young speakers to share. So that's still in the planning, but it will happen sometime in September, and then we'll have some more sessions kind of once a month for the rest of the year.
And there's also a bunch of recordings from past Communities for Future sessions on the YouTube page. I just posted the link in the chat. Any other closing words from Ecoli's colleagues before we close? Or anybody else?
Very good work, team, and everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your day. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.